As you listen to these words right now, there is a piece of rock standing silently on a desolate plain, swept by the wind on the surface of Mars, viewed from a distance. It might seem like nothing more than an ordinary stone. Yet, sometimes the greatest secrets hide behind the most unassuming forms. This stone is like a silent witness to the universe. However, this mass lying in the heart of the red planet may bear the fingerprint of an organic being that once breathed and lived in the depths of the universe. This is not a simple theory or a bold guess. We are talking about a concrete discovery published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, scrutinized to the finest detail for months by over 1,000 experts and passed through peer review. Planetary geologists and astrobiologists cannot explain the strange chemical patterns on the rock through any natural process other than biology. This situation confirms the fundamental principle of astrobiology. Life leaves behind a signature that is chaotic, yet orderly. Impossible for geology to mimic. Volcanic activities or geological reactions cannot leave such traces. Perhaps we are currently standing face to face with the strongest and most irrefutable evidence for the existence of life on another planet. The fact that we are not alone in the vast universe has been waiting for us to find it for billions of years, under a cloud of cold and red dust. While this discovery ends humanity's narcissistic loneliness, it simultaneously brings us to the brink of a cosmic responsibility. In these days when we face this massive moment of enlightenment offered to us by the universe, we are laying the foundation for another great, human endeavor. We are building massive rockets to permanently send our own species to the unforgiving Mars, which carries the possibility of having harbored life. The metal towers reaching toward the sky are seen as symbols of humanity's desire to transcend boundaries. But these metal towers are not merely means of transport. They are monuments of technological hubris, challenging millions of years of our biological evolution. However, the planned journey does not resemble the stories of explorers who crossed oceans in the past, or the first step taken on the moon. The goal is to prepare to send the human body to an environment that is completely alien and entirely hostile to its millions of years of evolution. Explorers going to Mars will witness their own bones slowly melting day by day under the relentless effect of low gravity. They will be unable to stop invisible cosmic radiation storms from piercing through their skulls every second of every day, quietly rewriting the architecture of their brains even as they sleep. Under this radiation bombardment, neuroplasticity will cease to be a mechanism for learning and transform into a process of mental erosion. They will helplessly watch the fragmentation of their minds in silence and the destruction of their memories. They will follow the aging, the growth, and perhaps the passing away of the people they love through cold video recordings that arrive with a 20-minute delay. By the time the image on the screen reaches its destination, the loved one will have already lived and moved past that moment. Perceptions of time and space will be irrevocably severed from life on Earth. People who set out on this journey may never return home, not just because they sincerely choose to stay or are strictly committed to their duties, but because the fuel and technology to bring them back to Earth, the safe pale blue dot, have not yet been invented. They will be stranded on the planet. This is a solitary confinement sealed by the laws of physics, unlike any prison sentence known to the modern world. Often, the vision of Mars presented to us is nothing more than an inspiring, bright, and modern dream. A perfect rocket reflecting sunlight on the launch pad, a digital clock counting backward, and an enthusiastic atmosphere created by thousands of engineers cheering in the middle of the desert. However, the perfect marketing image covers the actual reality like a thick and misleading veil. We are talking about the dark price that must actually be paid, not the glittering dream. In reality, we see in all its nakedness what exactly happens physically and mentally to a person who leaves Earth, goes beyond orbit, and never returns. We examine the radiation consuming the body from within and the endless silence tearing cells apart. Psychologically, this silence creates a burden of loneliness that forces the mind to fold in on itself. We are putting on the table why we are rushing to set foot on the planet. Before even finishing asking vital questions, like should we really go? And the rock that bears the fingerprint of something once alive. We consider the fate of lonely children who might one day be born in the red deserts, but, because their anatomy will be shaped according to Mars, will never be able to visit the world their parents left behind. These children, biologically Martian, will be eternal exiles who can only watch their parents' paradise through screens. We look at the dark side of corporate structures that already write in their own terms of service that no government on Earth has authority over Mars. The picture before us is not so much humanity's universal story of discovery, as it is the story of the eternal exile of bodies torn from their homeland. The technology giants steering humanity's space vision have been selling us all a perfect dream for years. On glittering stages in front of massive crowds, the closeness of the dates for going to the Red Planet has been heralded with great confidence time and again. The drawn timeline was precise, daring, and exciting. We were led to believe that in a very short time, we would be walking on the soil of another world. This was the reason for building massive rockets, the purpose of the existence of new generation spacecraft. However, as time passed, the ambitious words echoing on the stages gave way to quiet postponements. The targeted launch years were bypassed one by one. The promised dates were continuously pushed into an incalculable future. Focus points occasionally shifted to more achievable, closer goals, like establishing bases on the moon. Under the discourse of securing the future of civilization, it was slowly being admitted just how insurmountable the obstacles to interplanetary travel are. The cycle of continuous delay before us does not stem from a simple inadequacy in engineering or a lack of vision. It shows us a much deeper, much more staggering truth. There lies a massive gap between the glittering colonization presentations we watch on stages and the cold physics of the universe. Mars absolutely does not care about our timelines, ambitions, budgets, or will. The planet does not bow to humanity's survival instinct or technological pride. It continues to rotate silently at a distance of 55 million kilometers at its closest phase to us and 400 million kilometers at its most distant position when hidden behind the sun. Distance is not just a number. It is a multi-million-year void that stands between you and a helping hand. The distance to the destination, the ways to survive on its toxic surface, and the equation of return being close to impossible have never changed since the first engineer drew an orbit on a whiteboard. While the world focuses on shining steel rockets, digital countdown clocks, and narrowing launch windows, we overlook the dark reality taking shape in the background. We tend to imagine going to another planet as just an intercontinental flight that will take a bit longer. Magnificent animations, bright ships landing perfectly, and luminous habitats sell us exactly such an illusion. The marketing image thrust into our eyes covers the actual truth like a thick veil. We are seeking the actual price that must be paid, not the artificial dream. The question of what will happen to a person who leaves Earth, goes beyond orbit, and never returns cannot be answered by the optimistic music of launch videos. Before us stands not a simple expedition that exalts the human spirit, but literally an exile dictated by the laws of physics. Distance itself is a mind-crushing magnitude that completely destroys the meaning of fundamental human experiences. The massive cosmic void drawn between two worlds swallows a helping hand to be extended in emergencies. The ability to establish instant communication, saying goodbye to loved ones, and most importantly, the hope of being able to return home, mixing them into nothingness. Billions of dollars in investment and the dream of interplanetary life are actually just the beginning of a massive gamble testing the resilience of our souls. What we see is a surrender that requires us to face the heaviest of costs rather than a technological triumph. In the history of space exploration, a return ticket was always designed for every human who left our planet. In moments of despair, a safety net that connected them to their homes was available. Even the famous explorer Shackleton, trapped in the Antarctic glaciers, could make a deadly effort to reach land. The Apollo 13 crew, while passing around the moon in a crippled spacecraft, was talking to experts at Mission Control on Earth, with a delay measured in seconds. Submarines can surface in an emergency. Climbers can descend. Sailors lost in the ocean can be washed ashore by currents. However, the crew going to Mars has none of these options. There is no shore they can be washed to, no familiar surface they can reach. They can only move forward toward a planet trying to kill them in countless ways we haven't even finished cataloging, or toward an unreachable pale blue dot that has moved too far away to help. Historical comparisons often made equating Mars colonization with the courage of the Mayflower passengers or the first Polynesian sailors are a great and misleading mistake. In all those historical discoveries, no matter how challenging or deadly the environment crossed, it was filled with the same basic elements for which the human body was designed. A sailor lost in the ocean could still draw air into their lungs. A settler stepping onto a new continent in the wilderness could survive by drinking water from a river. When an Antarctic explorer stepped out of their tent, no matter how freezing the air was, the atmosphere did not boil their blood and destroy them in seconds. While the Earth's biosphere protects us everywhere like a womb, on Mars, every breath is a synthetic miracle. Mars provides none of these natural mercies. The void between two worlds is a cold vacuum that would shatter a human in seconds. The surface of the red planet is so hostile that going outside unprotected means certain death within minutes. The distance is so vast that no rescue team imaginable with current technology could reach a stranded astronaut before their supplies run out. This is not a travel or discovery route. It is literally a commitment with no return. You don't just leave your planet behind. Seas also leave behind every hospital, every fire station humanity has built to this day, every system that would catch you when you fall, and every friend who would hug you when you cry. On Mars, when you fall silently and all alone. The people who love you will learn of your pain and perhaps your death 20 minutes later, long after everything has happened. Task designers and engineers know this dark picture very well. They calculate every orbit, every drop of fuel, and millisecond communication delays. They put backups into systems and train the crew for every conceivable emergency. Still, when asked behind closed doors whether the return is guaranteed, the eyes of the honest ones drop to the floor, and there is a long silence before they answer. Because the return plan is entirely dependent on a chain of theoretical technologies that have never been tested. And if that chain breaks, the distance planned to be temporary becomes permanent forever. That 55 million kilometer void between you and everyone you love turns into an invisible but insurmountable tombstone that no desire can overcome. An uncancelable plan is no different from a cruel death sentence given to people. The actual cost of a Mars mission is not limited to the launch of rockets or delays in communication. Even if all obstacles are overcome and the spacecraft lands safely on the surface. Even if the habitat's life support systems work smoothly and the first human breathes the recycled air, the real tragedy only begins. What will the red planet do to the human body that arrives there? Before mental health, we must consider the fate of bones, muscles, eyes, and the heart, which have evolved according to the specific gravity of a single planet for millions of years. The human body is an extraordinary machine when it comes to adapting to the environment. However, this immense capacity for adaptation turns into a cruel betrayal when it comes to Mars, because your body does not know you want to return home. It only tries to adapt loyally to where it is. Being on the surface of Mars means feeling only 38% of the gravity you are used to on Earth, and your body, accepting this new reality, immediately begins to change to fulfill its duty. It literally takes steps toward becoming Martian and may never be able to return to its former state. The process of the body's alienation begins with the bones. Because the greatest betrayal is experienced in the skeletal system. Although your skeleton appears to be an inanimate scaffolding from the outside, It is actually entirely living tissue. It is constantly broken down and rebuilt by icky different types of cells working in opposition to each other. While osteoclasts dissolve old bone, osteoblasts create new bone tissue. In a healthy body and under normal gravity, these two processes are in perfect balance. Your skeleton completely renews itself roughly every 10 years. In other words, the bones you walked with 10 years ago are not the same as the bones you take your steps with today, however. This vital balance depends on something your bones take for granted every second: gravity and mechanical loading. Every time you stand up, walk across a room, or climb stairs, your skeleton feels a gravitational pull toward the ground. This constant load sends a vital signal to your bones to stay strong, maintain their density, and harden. Your skeleton understands from enduring this load that it is still needed. However, in the microgravity environment of deep space, this mechanical signal disappears completely. The osteoclasts responsible for the destruction work continue their duties and keep melting the bone as planned. But the osteoblasts responsible for the construction work slow down rapidly because they lose mechanical stimuli. The result is a clear and unstoppable loss in bone density. In weight-bearing areas of the body, especially in the hips, spine, and legs, a density drop of between 1% and 2% is experienced every month. All the structures designed to keep you upright against gravity begin to weaken. Just being in the microgravity within a spacecraft during the 6-month journey from Earth to Mars causes a loss of 6% to 12% in bone density. And this is the travel price you pay before even stepping onto the planet. Then, you land on the surface of Mars, where only 38% of the gravitational force that shaped your evolution exists. Does this low gravity suffice to stop bone loss? No one knows the definite answer, because we have never tested this situation on humans for months or years. The International Space Station operates in near-zero gravity, and everything we know about bone loss in space is based on data obtained from there. However, we have no concrete data on what will happen to human bone over months or years in Mars gravity. We only have estimates based on animal experiments and computer modeling. The best estimate is that Mars' gravitational force will not completely stop bone resorption, but only slow it down. Now, add the return journey home, which will take 6 to 9 months, to this equation. Long months spent again in microgravity. If that astronaut manages to return to Earth one day, they may have lost 20% to 30% of the bone density in the weight-bearing areas of their skeleton. To grasp what this figure means, think of the bone condition of an elderly woman with osteoporosis. Even if the astronaut is young and healthy, they will return to Earth with the skeleton of an old and fragile body. Moreover, there is no guarantee that this bone loss experienced in space is completely reversible. There is a dark truth that recovery studies do not voice very loudly. Bone loss experienced in space is not a completely reversible process once returned to Earth. NASA astronaut Scott Kelly spent 340 days on the International Space Station, the longest continuous spaceflight by an American. Examinations after his return to Earth showed that while some bone density was regained, the microarchitecture that forms the internal structure of his bones and gives them their true strength had changed permanently. The skeleton had sort of come back, but in a different, weaker, more fragile state with a reduced capacity to withstand the forces imposed by daily life on Earth. Moreover, Scott Kelly had spent less than a year in space. The journey to Mars and back takes a full 3 years. We have no data on what will happen to the human body on such a massive scale. We are sending people to a massive experiment that has never been conducted before, where their own bodies are used as the test subject. However, the measurable loss of the body under siege is not just bones. Next are the eyes. In 2011, NASA defined a condition called spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. About 2/3 of astronauts participating in long-duration missions experience some degree of visual impairment. The fundamental mechanism of this situation is the shifting of body fluids. On Earth, Gravity pulls blood and cerebrospinal fluid toward your feet. In microgravity, these fluids move toward your head. Increased intracranial pressure is pushed toward the back of the eye. It damages the optic nerve, flattens the eyeball, and causes vision problems ranging from slight blurring to significant distortion. When the astronaut returns to Earth, some of these changes reverse. However, many are permanent. Some astronauts returning from long-duration missions have reported permanent changes in their vision. They returned home seeing very differently than when they left. This was not the result of an injury or illness. It was simply a result of their organs that perceived the world reshaping themselves, as their bodies loyally tried to adapt to the alien conditions they were in. The first threat is solar particle events thrown violently by the sun during solar flares and coronal mass ejections. These are quite intense, violent, and relatively predictable radiation bursts. When a large solar event occurs, a massive proton and electron storm is hurled out of the solar system at speeds, reaching a significant portion of the speed of light. If a spacecraft or a crew on a planetary surface is caught in one of these storms without adequate protection, the radiation dose received can be fatal. It is high enough to lead to acute radiation poisoning and strong enough to directly take life in some extreme cases. However, the relatively good news is that partial shielding can be created against solar particle events. These protons from the sun have relatively low energy compared to other types of space radiation. A few centimeters of water, special polyethylene plates, or regolitha Martian soil piled over the habitat can greatly reduce the dose to be exposed. The actual bad news here is time. You need time to receive advance warning of the storm coming and enter the protected area. On the surface of a planet with no magnetic field and almost no atmosphere, the warning time for such a deadly solar storm can be as short as 15 minutes. When you receive the warning, you must race against seconds to hide. However, the actual invisible killer of space does not come from the sun. It is hurled from much farther away, from the hearts of dead stars. No matter how violent solar storms are, they are not the ones that are truly terrifying. The real threat that keeps radiation biologists awake at night are galactic cosmic rays. These particles do not come from our familiar sun. They are the remains of stars' supernovas that exploded and died millions or even billions of years ago, in distant corners of the galaxy. They consist of atomic nuclei that have been stripped of their electrons with the power of unimaginable destruction and have reached a speed close to the speed of light. These rays flowing from the depths of the cosmos carry such a massive energy that no known practical shield is enough to stop them. The part that defies logic is exactly here. You might think that building thick walls, using more metal, or putting more protective material in between would solve the problem. However, galactic cosmic rays do not behave like ordinary radiation. When a high-energy cosmic ray nucleus hits the aluminum body of a spacecraft or the wall of a habitat, it doesn't just stop there. On the contrary, it shatters with great violence. Under the effect of the collision, it turns into a massive secondary particle spray, consisting of neutrons, protons, pions, and gamma rays, scattering in every direction. This phenomenon, known as the secondary particle shower, actually creates a much greater biological damage than the original cosmic ray could give alone. Therefore, a thin or inadequate shield can make the radiation problem much more deadly, instead of solving it. Adding a few centimeters of aluminum to the spacecraft's hull paradoxically increases the total biological dose the crew is exposed to, because the secondary particles produced by the shield itself are much more destructive than the primary cosmic rays that pass directly into human tissue. The Curiosity rover carried a radiation detector called RAD. While going to Mars in 2011 and 2012, the device measured an average dose of 1.8 millisieverts per day in deep space. In a deep space journey, you receive in just 1.5 days the dose a human on Earth receives in a full year. A 6-month one-way Mars journey means roughly 300 millisieverts of radiation accumulation. When you land on the surface, Despite that minimal protection offered by the thin atmosphere, another 0.67 millisieverts is added per day. The mandatory 500-day stay you will spend there costs another 335 millisieverts. When you add the return path, a complete Mars round-trip mission exposes the crew to a massive radiation bombardment, between 600 and 1000 millisieverts. To grasp the context, it is enough to look at the career limits determined for NASA astronauts, which aim to keep the lifetime cancer risk below 3%. A Mars mission easily surpasses and shatters these limits. NASA's own peer-reviewed studies estimate that the risk of radiation-induced death for a Mars crew could exceed 5%, and in the worst-case scenario, approach 10%. The probability of 1 out of 10 people dying just because of radiation is an unacceptable statistic even for an experimental program. A commercial airline with a 10% death rate on Earth would be closed immediately. A surgical procedure with the same rate would be banned. Moreover, this rate only takes cancer into account. It does not include the other destruction caused by radiation, which is much more immediate, more insidious, and more terrifying than cancer. Radiation destroys brains. Researchers at the University of California, Irvine, conducted one of the most comprehensive studies examining the effects of cosmic ray-like radiation on the mammalian system. Using particle accelerators, low-dose heavy ion radiation in deep space was tested on mice for a long time. The results were extremely disturbing. Irradiated mice exhibited permanent impairments in the hippocampus, the brain region, responsible for forming new memories and spatial navigation. There was not just destruction at the cellular level, but a dramatic collapse in the mind's ability to solve problems, make decisions, and establish memories. Their ability to suppress conditioned fear responses decreased. They remained anxious and reactive long after the stimulus. The neural connections, the dendritic complexities that form the physical basis of thought and memory, were measurably impaired. The human mind was quietly being fragmented under that invisible rain falling on the skull. Dark data obtained from deep space simulations proved that the damage, occurring in a mouse's lifespan over months, shattering the neuron connections in the brain, was not temporary. Broken nerve networks sometimes snapped completely, and the mental destruction persisted long after irradiation ended. When proportioned to a human lifespan and the years-long timeline of a real Mars journey, the equivalent destruction of this dose exceeded even the most pessimistic estimates of researchers. During a round-trip Mars journey of a crew of 5 astronauts, at least one person is expected to exhibit severe cognitive deficits when they return to Earth. At least one person. This estimate put forward is not the product of an unfounded or alarmist study. They are the cold calculations of radiation biologists published with seriousness. Based on the best animal data directly funded by space agencies. Imagine what this scientific truth means operationally. You are in the middle of an 18-month period, millions of kilometers away from Earth, inside a completely sealed habitat on an alien world. You are in a ruthless place where every instant decision to be made, a small mistake, or a 1-second hesitation is the only difference between survival and death. And you make those critical decisions every second of every day, with a brain physically, irrevocably changed by invisible particles passing through your skull. Your memory may slowly blur. Your judgment may lose its old sharpness. Your ability to manage the situation in moments of stress and fear may be compromised. However, the cruelest part is likely that you won't even notice your own mental collapse. Cognitive decline is not like the pain given by a broken arm or a burning skin. You don't feel it happening. You cannot look down and see physical damage. Simply, day by day, month by month, you become a little less capable, a little less sharp, a little less yourself. You have no point of comparison left to measure how much of your mental power you have lost. And when that inevitable emergency, requiring the fastest, most perfect thinking knocks on your door, your brain will be at its farthest state from finding that answer. However, it is not only the volunteers who will pay the price of radiation. We must add the children to the equation. If a permanent colony is established on the Red Planet, and mankind begins to reproduce, their children born on that alien world will be born into a much different nightmare. Unlike adults who have already completed their development, or astronauts who have accepted the risk with full consciousness, they will be exposed to radiation as an embryo or a baby. An organism in development, where cells divide more rapidly and irregularly than at any other period in life, is many times more vulnerable to ionizing radiation than adults. A dividing cell means a DNA strand that is unwound, vulnerable, and completely exposed. Even a single mutation triggered by radiation during embryonic development multiplies in a chain reaction throughout the trillions of cell divisions that follow. It fundamentally affects every tissue, every organ that the first mutated cell contributed to. Now think of your heart. Your heart is also a muscle and responds to the body's demands like all muscles. Under Earth's gravity, it works constantly to pump blood against gravity up to your brain, arms, and every region that remains above your center of mass. However, in microgravity, this intense effort is no longer necessary. Blood flows freely in the vessels without the need for the heart to pump against the gravitational gradient. When the workload decreases, the heart, just like other muscles, begins to atrophy. Its size shrinks and its strength weakens. After a long-duration space mission, when an astronaut returns to Earth, they must suddenly restart pumping against full gravity with their shrunken and weakened heart. The result of this sudden loading is orthostatic intolerance, a state of being unable to stand without fainting. Blood suddenly pools in the legs, and the weakened heart cannot push it back to your brain fast enough. When the astronaut stands up, they feel dizzy and collapse. This happens to almost every astronaut returning after staying in space for a long time. It is an expected, documented, and precautioned process. When they land, medical teams wait ready, but no medical team will be waiting for them on Mars. The crew will reach the destination after a 6-day journey in microgravity and will have to start functioning directly in a gravitational field, even if it is reduced. If their hearts have atrophied during the journey and their cardiovascular systems have been reshaped according to zero gravity, even taking a simple step to stand up on the Martian surface could turn into a fatal medical crisis. And then comes the spine. Without the compressive force of gravity, intervertebral discs expand in microgravity. Astronauts grow 1 to 2 inches in height during space missions. While this sounds harmless, it is not. Expanded discs become much more vulnerable to herniation. Back pain is a nearly universal complaint among astronauts returning to Earth. And herniated discs that can cause severe pain, numbness, and loss of movement have been documented at very high rates in the years following SPACEFLIGHT. Each system, such as bone, eyes, heart, and spine, fails in its own way. But when all come together, they create a chain reaction much more terrifying than individual destruction. The human body binds itself with extraordinary loyalty to the environmental conditions in which it evolved to stay alive. However, on the Mars journey, this loyalty turns into the greatest vulnerability. Your body rapidly adapts to fluid distributions, reduced gravity, and weakened cardiovascular workloads that do not exist on Earth. It irrevocably optimizes itself for a place that is not home. The cruelest part is that your body does not resist these destructive changes, but embraces them. It only tries to help you survive where it is. It doesn't know you'll want to go home one day. This biological tragedy brings with it a dark question that should keep every space mission planner awake at night, one that no one has been able to answer yet. If a colony established on Mars survives long enough, if habitats maintain their integrity, if life support systems and food production work smoothly, and if invisible radiation doesn't kill everyone, eventually children will be born there. Not the brave astronauts who chose to go or the adventurous volunteers who signed the consent forms, but innocent human infants who had no say over their own fates and did not choose to exist there. A child conceived on Mars will develop under a pressure of only about 38% of Earth's gravity from the very first moment of pregnancy. Their bones will be shaped under a gravitational force less than half of the load the human skeleton evolved to support. This child's muscles will be calibrated entirely to Mars conditions. Their cardiovascular system will be built for a world where pumping blood is much easier and the heart does not need to be as strong as on Earth. The entire circulatory system, architecture will be able to afford being much smaller, much thinner, and much weaker. Simulated partial gravity experiments on animals show that organisms developing in these conditions produce skeletal and muscle structures inadequate for Earth conditions. Bones formed under low gravity lack the density and microstructure required to withstand normal Earth gravity. Muscles developing without a full gravity load can never produce the force needed to move a body that will suddenly pull 2.5 times its own weight. A child born and raised on Mars may be biologically completely devoid of the ability to visit Earth. This impossibility does not stem from a political travel restriction or an economic cost. That delicate body built by Mars cannot come to Earth, because it would literally collapse under the massive weight of the world its parents came from. Their bones could break, their heart could fail, and their spine, adjusted to a gentler gravity, could be crushed in a way that leads to permanent damage. We have never done such an experiment on humans before, and we have no concrete data. We only have computer models, forward-looking estimates, and educated guesses. We do not know for sure how the entire development process, from human embryo to adulthood, will result in 38% gravity. But there is one unshakable truth we know. Gravity shapes everything about how a body is built, down to the finest detail. And if this gravity is wrong, that is, too little by Earth's standards, the resulting body will certainly not belong to Earth. The first generation born on Mars will not be the pioneering colonists who conquered it. These will be eternal exiles imprisoned in a world they did not choose, simply because of their biology, against their own will. They will never be able to visit that planet which every story coming from Earth, every screen they watch, and every voice they hear tells them is home. For them, home will turn into an untouchable concept, an empty word attached to a pale blue dot in the sky. They will be able to see that dot every night, but they will never be able to touch it. Their parents had chosen Mars with a great dream. Their children, however, inherited this heavy legacy. This terrible biological gap between a chosen exile and an innate condemnation may be the deepest ethical crisis that Mars colonization forces us to face. This ethical crisis lies in the fact that humanity's ambition to make a new planet home biologically strips away the freedom of choice from those born there. However, the human body will not only have to struggle with low gravity on the red planet. An invisible and much more deadly danger from the depths of space waits patiently beyond the walls. The human body does not only need to fight gravity on Mars or on the way there. In the depths of space, and on the surface of the red planet, there is another silent, invisible, and absolutely ruthless enemy. A threat that passes easily, without slowing down at all, through the thick metal walls of spacecraft, the fabrics of high-tech astronaut suits, and finally through the living tissue of the human body. We are talking about a danger that rewrites DNA, shatters neural connections, and constantly increases the probability of cancer in every second of exposure. Radiation is the most terrifying threat in many ways, because you cannot see it, you cannot feel it, and you can never escape from it. There is no safe haven where you can hide on that long road from Earth to Mars, and at any point on the surface, while living on Earth, you are protected by two massive shields that you probably never noticed and didn't think about. The first of these is the magnetosphere produced by the churning of the molten iron core kilometers beneath your feet. This massive magnetic power balloon deflects most of the charged particles streaming rapidly from space toward Earth, like a rock in a river, splitting the water in Iki and steering it away from the planet. The second shield is our atmosphere, about 100 kilometers thick, surrounding the Earth. It is a thick gas blanket that also absorbs and scatters the rare radiation that the magnetosphere allows inside. These two natural shields work together to reduce your annual radiation exposure to an extremely low level of an average of 2 to 3 mil. Your body is capable of repairing the cellular damage from such a low dose almost instantly before it even accumulates. However, the situation on Mars is completely different. Both of these shields vanished billions of years ago. The red planet completely lost its global magnetic field when its iron core cooled and solidified. There is no longer a magnetic dynamo to deflect those deadly charged particles filling the interplanetary void. The remains of the atmosphere surrounding the planet are less than 1% of Earth's pressure at sea level. This thin gas layer is definitely insufficient to block cosmic radiation or stop high-energy particles that have been traveling at speeds close to the speed of light within the galaxy for millions of years. The radiation environment awaiting astronauts on the route between Earth and Mars and on the planet's surface basically consists of icky different dangers. Understanding these dangers is the key to grasping the destruction the Mars mission will create on the human body. It is a certain scientific fact that the radiation dose a child will accumulate on the Martian surface throughout their growth phase will be of unimaginable and destructive proportions that no developing human in our species' history has ever experienced. We have strict ethical frameworks, institutional review boards, informed consent requirements, and laws protecting vulnerable populations on Earth that strictly prohibit exposing children to such extreme and unpredictable risks. However, as of today, none of these human protective shields reach children born on another planet. There is no regulation, international treaty, or law that determines the radiation limit that a child conceived on Mars, who has no option to leave from there or return to the safe sky of Earth will be exposed to. Who gave approval for those children to pay the price? Who will be responsible for what radiation will do to their developing brains, growing bones, and cells dividing every second? The parents who chose to colonize? The company that carried them there? The governments that funded the missions? Or the engineers who designed the habitats? When does the ambition to build a new and distant civilization turn into an act of cruel crime committed against the people born into it? The answer to this question has not yet been given, but it hangs like a dark shadow over every long-term residence plan designed and every habitat sketch drawn. The invisible killer does not care about ambitions, courage, or the dream of being an interplanetary species. It just continues its quiet and patient destruction. But radiation is only one of the ways the planet will use to kill you. The ruthless destruction of Mars on the human body is not limited to the slow and quiet yikum of radiation. The planet itself, with its atmosphere, soil, and weather events, literally works like a massive machine designed for death. We must understand that the surface of the red planet does not consist only of the fascinating landscapes seen in photos. The only way to grasp why going there is not an expedition but a survival war that lasts continuously every second you breathe is to know how the surface would feel when it touches your skin and fills your lungs. Before us stands a world that wants to see you dead. Mars has an atmosphere. Making this distinction is extremely important, because when people hear the word atmosphere, they generally imagine something similar to Earth's. They think of that familiar, comforting blanket of air that keeps heat inside, keeps the cold of space out, and is breathable. The Martian atmosphere has nothing to do with this comfortable image. What surrounds the planet is a thin, ghostly gas layer that exerts only about 6 millibars of pressure on the surface. For comparison, the atmospheric pressure at sea level on Earth is about 10-13 millibars. The atmosphere of Mars is much lower than 1% of the pressure you are used to. This is not just thin air. It is literally a functional vacuum. If you were to step outside your habitat on Mars one day without your protective pressure suit, the air inside your lungs would expand instantly and violently. The moisture on your tongue and covering your eyes would start boiling that very second. However, This boiling does not result from high temperature, but from the fact that the pressure around you has almost completely disappeared. In an environment like 6 millibars, the boiling point of water drops much below human body temperature. Because your circulatory system will maintain its own internal pressure for a short time, your blood won't boil instantly. But the fluids on the outside of your body, your saliva, your tears, and that vital moisture lining your respiratory tract would evaporate within seconds. As popular culture often depicts, when you step onto Mars, you don't instantly freeze into an ice statue. Long before that, you suffocate at a terrifying speed. The carbon dioxide that makes up 96% of the planet's atmosphere fills your lungs with every reflexive breath you desperately take. When you breathe carbon dioxide in such high concentrations, loss of consciousness occurs in seconds. Death is only a few minutes away. To all this physical destruction, the ambient temperature adds its own deadly dimension. The average surface temperature of Mars is -60 degrees. On a full summer afternoon at the equator, thermometers can rise to a relatively mild 20 degrees. However, when night falls, at the poles, or during winter months, temperatures drop mercilessly to -140 degrees, and even below. A cold at this level is severe enough to directly freeze the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In other words, the frost formed on the Martian surface is not water ice as we know it, but the frozen gas itself. Exposing an unprotected human to such a temperature drop causes the core body temperature to collapse at an incredible speed. Hypothermia takes over the body in minutes, and frostbite cases on exposed skin start almost instantly. But despite all this, it's worth repeating. Your primary cause of death will not be the cold. Before the temperature freezes you, the atmosphere itself, or the deadly lack of atmosphere, will end your life. The photos reaching Earth from the planet are truly breathtaking. The massive rust-colored sand dunes, the layered walls of Muazzam canyons, and that soft pink light painting the sky at sunset offer an unforgettable and fascinating beauty that appeals to the depths of human imagination. However, every one of those magnificent photos was taken by an inanimate machine that does not have lungs, blood, or skin, and has no need to breathe. While watching that beauty, you must never forget that the aesthetics of the red planet is actually a deadly lie. You are watching the cold splendor of a place that will kill you in seconds when the technology you possess gives a tiny malfunction. Mars is much more than a vacuum and freezing world where you cannot breathe. This is literally a planet made of dust. It hosts massive events that lift fine particles on the surface and turn them into massive windstorms, covering the entire planet. These storms sometimes create global catastrophes that trap the entire world inside a suffocating fog for months. Even the dust of Mars itself is extremely unique. With its size measured in micrometers, it is much smaller than sand grains. These tiny particles, with a fineness close to the particles in cigarette smoke, relentlessly cover every surface on the red planet. Dust doesn't just stay outside. It manages to seep into all kinds of seals and insulation. It works its way into the narrowest gaps of machine parts, moving joints, the delicate mechanisms of solar panels, and the depths of screw threads. In 2018, a massive dust storm surrounding Mars completely killed the Opportunity rover, which had been successfully serving on the planet for more than 14 years. This resilient machine, which had already exceeded its 90-day design life and managed to survive almost every challenge Mars threw at it, succumbed to the power of dust. For weeks, the storm reduced the sunlight reaching the panels to nearly zero. Without power, the vehicle's heaters could not operate. Without heat, all the electronic systems inside froze and shattered. After 14 years of loyal service, Opportunity's last data transmission is actually a poetic and bitter end. Its battery was dying, the sun was disappearing, and there was nothing that could be done from Earth for a human colony dependent on solar energy. Such a global dust storm is not an instant inconvenience, but directly an existential threat. When the sky darkens, energy production drops below that critical threshold needed for life support systems. Oxygen production slows down. Heating systems begin to falter. The only thing the storm cares about is blowing. It never takes your return timeline or energy reserves into account. It can last 100 days or longer. While the apocalypse is breaking out outside, you can do nothing but sit inside your habitat and watch the power indicators slowly melt away. You desperately ration every watt of energy, wondering whether the sun will return before the batteries are completely dead. However, the actual insidious danger of Martian dust is not that it freezes machines or cuts sunlight. The real horror lies in what those fine particles will do to human lungs. In 2008, NASA's Phoenix lander confirmed a dark truth that changed all calculations of Mars' surface operations forever. Inside the Martian soil were perchlorates, which are highly toxic to the human thyroid gland and contain reactive chlorine compounds. Subsequent exploration missions proved that these perchlorates were not just regional, but on the contrary, spread like a deadly blanket over the entire planetary surface. We would immediately classify any area on Earth as a hazardous waste site due to the concentrations it contains. Perchlorates are colorless and odorless. When you return to the living area from a surface walk, you cannot see them inside the dust covering your gloves. You cannot smell them on the microscopic particles settling on the surfaces of your habitat. But they get inside through every way they can find. They seep into your home silently on the soles of your boots, clinging to the fabric of your spacesuits, or on the equipment brought inside for maintenance. Over time, they contaminate food production systems and begin to accumulate in air filtration units. By slowly and silently disrupting thyroid function and blocking iodine intake, this destructive process, leading to hypothyroidism and potential developmental disorders over time, is a deadly cycle that the human living on Mars draws in with every breath they take.